Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
This is one of these beautiful signs that is not 30 degrees that we're talking about today, and that is Cancer season, properly Cancer season. The sun spends only 20 days in this sign, and fun fact is that on the 8-8, what a lot of people call Lion's Gate, the sun actually still sits in Cancer. Just a little side fact there for our audience. Today we are discussing the full moon happening on the 30th of July here in New Zealand, which is early Thursday morning, where the sun is sitting in Cancer. But let's start with the moon. The moon is sitting at 6 degrees Capricorn, making some beautiful conjunctions, but the moon energy, it carries so many beautiful nuances. So let's just make sure that everyone is on the same page with what this moon energy does.
Yeah, and before I do that, it's it's interesting when we come across people and we introduce the idea of 13 sign astrology, and generally that's a pretty easy conversation. Most people on this planet, if you ask them the question whether they follow astrology or not, whether they're spiritual, whether they're awake and aware, it doesn't matter. If you ask them what their star sign is, they can be the most unaware, unawake person, but they'll still know their star sign, interestingly enough, and generally that can open some quite fascinating conversations. And if there's an area where I've had the most aggressive defensive responses from people, it will be where I have had that opening conversation with them and they honestly believe that they're a Leo. And when you run, I've had this on a couple of occasions, and then you run a 13 sign chart and they're not a Leo, they're a Cancer, and it is like their whole world collapsed with that piece of information. And I've had particularly two people I can bear in mind, one of who just had an absolute meltdown about that, just refused to acknowledge it. And that's fine, because what it says to me is that often people will, whether they admit it or not, will align a lot of their personality and their behaviour with what they believe to be right to the bottom of their soul. They actually genuinely believe that they are whatever sign it is. You know, again, the other sign where I see this particularly is on the not Leo, Cancer, it's the Taurus, Gemini, where, you know, I've met people who believe they're Geminis, and they're not Geminis, they're Taurus. And again, they just refuse. It's funny because, you know, my awakening process and pathway here for 13 sign was, I thought I was a Scorpio and was actually Libra, and I welcomed that change, because for my whole life of believing that I was a Scorpio, it never felt right. But yet, for these individuals, and it's just merely pointing out of how fixed we can become in the image and the beliefs that we link to a particular star sign, and some people would prefer to be a Leo than they would prefer to be a Cancer. And the funny thing as we move into talking about the moon, which of course is the guardian of Cancer, the funny thing about one of these individuals is that, you know, they are a female who really wants to be a mother. And I think if they actually came into alignment, you know, this is a spiritual person, this is somebody who takes this stuff quite seriously, which is why they were prepared to have a reading. This was years ago. And they still believe and project themselves as a Leo, and I see their soul, having had that interaction with them, which was quite profound. I see that within them there's this conflict of their mind believes and their personality and their sun in fact as a archetype wants to project this image of being a Leo because that's what people have always known them as. They've built their whole life around it, and Leo's one of those signs, like Gemini, again, interestingly, the extroverted signs, the ones that seem to be, the life of the party. If you look at often how people will briefly describe both Leo and Gemini as opposed to Cancer and Taurus, everyone wants to be, or a lot of people want to be the lion or the lioness. They don't want to be the crab, or they don't want to be a crustacean. They don't want to be scuttling around, which is the image that people have of the Cancer and the Moon, which is completely distorted, by the way. There's so much tied up in not the literal translation of the spirit creature tied to Cancer versus Leo. It's the metaphorical imagery that can be obtained from that, and they're missing that. And the key insight I would say about one of those individuals who, as she gets a little older and she continues to really try to express the Leo side, but yet her soul yearns to be a mother, which is very much a Cancer energy. And I'm not to know, and I don't know what that person's soul path is. I cannot know that. That's between them and source consciousness, their creator. But what I have observed is that it feels to me, having done lots and lots of readings, and we've done plenty together, that often when people embrace their true divine design, a lot shifts not only internally but also externally. And it wouldn't surprise me in a situation like that if she embraced being the Cancer, that actually the motherhood and the relationship, and we're going to talk about Juno, she would almost like skip into the right lane, if you like. She would be positioned to receive what life has to give in terms of, firstly, a partner to share that experience with, which is a Juno, and we're going to touch on that, but also the whole beauty of motherhood and the multi-dimensionality of the Moon and Cancer, and we'll touch on those aspects. The Moon and Cancer are probably the most complex sign of all. So I just say that, and it just as an observation. I didn't plan to start there, but just when you talked about that, it just triggered me to say that. And this whole thing about Gemini, Taurus, it's a similar sort of thing as, a friend of mine, a good friend, knows she's a Taurus, accepts she's a Taurus. We did a reading, even looks a little bit more Taurian, right, in the way her physical structure and her love of beauty and luxury, and a lot of that is associated with the sign of Venus, but refuses really to come into alignment with it and would rather be a Gemini because, I want to be the life of the party, which again is just a game.
And it's also, we've done a few readings where we've deep dived into the Gemini energy, and it's like the Western look on Gemini is missing half the story.
Oh yeah.
There is the opposite side. I don't, dark in quotation marks there. So people in the West are very much life of the party is Gemini and also Leo. But for me, gosh, the guardian of Gemini is Mercury, or the guardian of Taurus is Venus. I know which one I would rather have. And having that stability and the beauty, the perhaps, you're very aligned with art or cooking or having a cozy home, but you keep forcing yourself into, I am a Gemini. It's fascinating of how much people try to make something fit.
Absolutely. And, that, believe it or not, is a segue, part of what I'm going to touch on with the Moon.